talk a little bit live. We're going to talk a little bit about the founding of the New Kingdom. We're going to talk about Ahmose I, and let's just kind of pick up what we were talking about before, kind of pick up where we left off, because we were talking a little while ago about just the names, the Kemetic names, and what the rulers and the Nswts, how they talked about themselves, how they referred to themselves, that whole idea of having a divine outlook. And before that, a couple days ago, we talked about Kamos, the brother, probably the older brother of Ahmose, who helped to kind of kick off this whole initiative of the Dynasty 18 and 17 people helping to push the Hyksos, the foreign rulers, the Het-ka-Ptah, to kick them out of Kemet altogether. And so we talked a little bit about that, and I want to kind of jump back on that whole conversation, whole topic, and talk about it from the standpoint of not just how they did it, because we're going to get into how they did it and the documentation around it and what we know about it, and things related to Kush and that type of thing, but also apply it to yourself. What if you had to build a kingdom? What if you had to build an empire? What if you're building something in your life and for your family that goes well beyond what you are? What if you build something that lasts? Because this is what this man was faced with in history. He was faced with the idea and the opportunity to build something that was going to last for many, many years and really go down in human history as one of the greatest families, one of the greatest events, one of the most significant ruling times in all of human history. Because what happened in the New Kingdom and the start of the New Kingdom is one of the most famous things we know about ancient Kemet. I mean, it's like the center of it, if you will. And he's kicking off a whole new time. What would you do? What do you do if you have to build an empire? So we're going to talk about that from a spiritual perspective as well. So thank you so much for those who are joining me. I really much appreciate it. Thank you. God bless you. And please put your comments down. I thank you so much for joining. But I want to kind of jump on that topic and kind of have that conversation, because we're meeting Ahmose here. We are meeting him. We're meeting him maybe for the first time if you're joining here, and we're talking about just how he had an entire basically empire that was on his shoulders. And we talked a little bit before about how he looked at themselves and the whole concept of names and what names may mean from a Kemetic standpoint. And we'll kind of jump back into it. But I do want to touch on a little bit as we talk about this, kind of revisit it, because we were talking about that yesterday and the day before yesterday, just to revisit that whole idea of what the name meant, what the names meant, how you might view yourself, and that whole idea of doing something significant. When you're trying to build an empire, you can't go into a fight or go into a challenge not believing in yourself. You can't go into a challenge with doubt in your mind. You really have to understand that you're building up energy, that love and the force and the things that you do the things that you do for righteousness make you go a whole lot farther than things you do for hate. So the things you do for righteousness, the things you do for a righteous cause, when you really have that behind you, is what gives you your power, and it gives you the ability and the courage to face a difficult situation. So here was Kamos, and to give you some idea of where he was just in history, as we kind of look at the timeline here, you can kind of get an idea. And this was his grandmother, Queen Teddy Sherry, and then his mother, and then we kind of get around to around 1550 BC as we start to talk about him. But he was facing a situation where he is in a significant time in history. There are foreign rulers called the Het-ka-Ptah, or the Hyksos, people like to call them that. That was the Greek referred to him, and Manetho referred to him as that. But these were foreign rulers who came from some of the east of ancient Kemet and came into there. And there's some people believe that these were open borders. I mean, just like today, these were borders that were open. People came in and out. So it could have been, some foreign people and foreign rulers, or people who were there in certain kinds of ways for a period of time in ancient Kemetic history. You could have had people there who were from various parts, because, for a long period of time, Kemet was the powerhouse of the world. It was the breadbasket of the world. It was the most significant, power, especially in that part of the world for most of its existence. And so you would have people would probably go there to seek refuge, to seek shelter, for all kinds of reasons, that you would go to a place that was stable if you were struck by famine, like the story of Joseph in the Bible and things of that nature, and his whole family around that. So you had Hyksos who were there, and at one point in time, toward the end of the Middle Kingdom, you had the power structure that was in Kemet, that was really going from the southern part of Kemet. So when you think about Kemet, and you think about the southern part, really going from the southern part of Kemet. So as we kind of look at that and kind of pull this up, we're talking about the southern part of ancient Kemet. That's where the power structure was. That's where the power structure was for the Middle Kingdom, for the New Kingdom, for the Middle Kingdom. It was coming from the south. And even at the very beginning of Kemet's history, you go back well before 3100 BC, even the beginning of Kemet history, the structure that put in place what will become what we know as ancient Kemet came from the south. It came from this part of ancient Kemet. So a lot of people will talk about that, and they will talk about, the difference. And we know that people, the farther south you went, the darker they got, that type of thing. We understand that, and a lot of people just mix that up in terms of history. But the evidence shows, the archaeological evidence shows that the people who were around Nekton and what is today El Kab and Nekhbet and all those areas around here, Yebo, this was the area that galvanized itself and really went up into the northern part at the very beginning of Kemet's history. As a matter of fact, and I've talked about this in previous ones, and I could talk about this again, when you look at even King Unas, who was from the last king of the fifth dynasty, he talks about in his pyramid text the south, if you will, the white crown, if you will, going up to swallow the red crown and bringing the two lands together. Now, this is Dynasty 5, before the Middle Kingdom, before the New Kingdom. Here is a king of the Old Kingdom talking about how the folks from the south came and swallowed up the folks from the north. And the archaeological evidence shows that. It shows that the culture that was there pre-dynastic, the dynastic culture that we talk about, Nakada, Nakada 1, Nakada 2, Nakada 3, that whole area around this area, that area was a culture that was in place, and the whole worshiping of Heru and seeing as Heru as being an aspect of the person who's in charge, that was there from ancient times, even before Kemet was a country, even before the two lands were united, right? That was there, and it was that culture that coalesced into larger and larger societies and groups to the point it was centralized, where it could come to the point and go up in the north and kind of take over the north and start what we know as ancient Kemet, one of the greatest, kingdoms and societies that we know of in human history. And so when you think about that, how do you get that? How do you galvanize that? Or how do you approach something so significant in your life that where you can just feel it's historic, where you can feel it's an significant part? And that's what they were facing from the pre-dynastic times. And I want to also point out that from a pre-dynastic time, when the folks around this southern part of Kemet came and kind of unified the lands for the first time, when you look at the history of it, the archaeologists will tell you that they just rename it. There's a period that they call pre-dynastic, but when they begin to call it dynasties, that's why they have a dynasty 0. When they begin to call it dynasty 1 and things of that nature, they really are just renaming it from an archaeological standpoint. They didn't call themselves dynasties, obviously, right? It's just being renamed. There was no significant difference in culture change. There was no significant difference from the people who were practices, even the people you think about in Kustal and all this area. There was no significant difference in their practice when they came up 3,100 years before Christ, more than 5,000 years ago, and unified the land for the first time. There wasn't a change in their culture. This culture existed for years, many, many years before the forming of the new land. So as I think about that, it really just kind of gives you some perspective around it, that sometimes in your life, you're about to do something historic. You're about to do something amazing. And when you're going to do something amazing, that idea of how you look at yourself, the idea of what you're putting in place, the idea that you're doing it based on a righteous standpoint becomes very significant. And as we look at that, the Kemetic rulers saw themselves as divine representations of God, right? Which is how we should see ourselves, right? How we should see ourselves. And when you look at it, they had a Heru name, which I mentioned yesterday. Heru being the son of Ausar and Auset, that divine principle that is the divinity of God, married with the discipline and prayer and monitoring. When you get that together, you birth Heru, right? The son of Ausar and Auset, who has courage, who is will, who's man's right to be able to decide for him or herself what it is they're going to accept, how they're going to move forward in God's life, how they're going to have the courage to face the things that are in front of them, or the courage to let divinity to lead them, to let the divine lead them. That takes courage. It takes, you literally have to go do the work on the inside. If you're in a situation where you're going to let the divine lead you, you got to do work on the inside. And you're going to find that not a lot of people like what you're doing. This whole spirituality, this whole idea of us claiming back our history and our divinity, as we start to claim back our history, there are a lot of people who don't want us to do it. There are a lot of people, as you see, banning books or attacking you on social media, who don't want you to talk about the reality of your answers and the reality of reclaiming your divinity and who you are. You're going to get challenged and pushed by. It's going to take internal work and an internal belief in yourself to be able to face it. You're going to have to be working with God. So that concept of them being Heru, so the rulers, the Nswt, had a Heru name where they took on the identity and the concept of Heru. They had a Nebty name that looked at the two deities, if you will, the two female deities that were the support for the two lands, for the upper and lower part of Kemet. They were basically, run, if you will, and supported by two female deities. And those two female deities, it was called the Nebty name. And the ruler, in this case, is Amentuhotep II, would take on a Nebty name. So there's a Nebty name, understanding that the very forces that are supporting your land and supporting where you are supporting you. They are in support of you and they got your back, so to speak. And then also looking at a golden Heru name. We talked about Heru having different forms, and I just want to thank those who've joined us. God bless you. Her love for the brothers and sisters cannot be stopped. Thank you. God bless you. How you doing? God bless you, Pope Williams. How you doing? God bless you. Thank you for joining. So I just want to say thank you for joining, because you guys have so many important things to say, so many things, important things to contribute. So I really appreciate your joining as we talk about the new kingdom today. So as we, so the golden Heru, that concept of the golden Heru and taking on that name, that being an understanding that you are of the same substance of God, understanding that Heru had different forms, and really coming down to the fact that you belong here. You belong in a divine space. Whatever God has for you in your life belongs to you. You deserve it. It belongs to you. You belong to it. It belongs to you. You don't have to feel like you're out of place anyway. What God has for you is for you, and it's yours to keep and to accept, if you will. Then there is a Nswt. And Nswt is the name, the general name for rulers. So you'll hear them say Nswt a lot when they refer to ancient Kemetic rulers, if you will. You'll see Nswt a lot. And that Neswt referred to this right here of the sedge and the bee. So the sedge is a plant that's an upper Kemet. So the Neswt referred to upper Kemet, the southern part, and this is the deity for the southern part, and that's the plant. And the BIty referred to this figure right here, this bee, which is part of lower Kemet, the northern part. And so the Nswt BIty was referring to, they would call it the king of upper and lower Kemet. That's what we would translate it. That's how it's translated now. But they were really the Nswt BItys, and really looking at those two sides of one half of a whole, or two halves of one whole kind of coming together. If you have dichotomy in your life, if you have challenges and things that seem, you are really the Lord of it. You're really the king, the queen of those two aspects of your life, that your mind and your spirit, your mind and your body. You are in control of that, and those things support you. So that whole idea of being Lord of the two lands, right, of the place where you live, I think that's like mind and body, like you being in control of the things that are part of your life. And then the very last name was their Nomen name, or their birth name. And a lot of times, by the time the new kingdom came around, they were son of Ra. And in this case, this was Mentuhotep, where you see Hotep right here, Mentuhotep II. So son of Ra. And so you will find that as they looked at themselves as being literally the bodily expression of God, the bodily expression of the force of God that brought us in life. Think of your body as whole. I mean, the Bible tells us that your body is the temple of your spirit. Your body is a temple. When you think about going to church, really everywhere you go is church. You don't really go to church. Church goes with you. You wherever you go is church. How you should be acting, however you should act in church, is how you should be acting, period, because you are ultimately the temple of God. You are ultimately the body of God. What you have, the expression, the cells, the trillions of cells that are in you, the forces that are the atomic forces that are in play, that are automatically dividing cells right now in your body and allowing you to think and to hear these things and processing things that we can't even begin to imagine and think about. That was made without people. That was made, those things have their own properties, and they have their own forces and their own ability and characteristics. You are literally a divine expression. So understanding your body itself as being a divine expression of God. So that was the mindset that Kemetic rulers, and in particular ones that we're going to talk about, because you think about the first person who helped to unify the two lands, and you think about Mentuhotep, which is the second here, and then you think about Ahmose, which is the third. Think about you having a monumental task to accomplish in your life, and now you're about to go do it, but you have this perspective of yourself, right? So we're going to go ahead and talk about Ahmose, and how did he look at himself? This is him. This is a depiction of him. He's around 1550 or so, 1550 BC. He is at the start of a new kingdom. His brother, his mother, his father, his grandfather, his grandparents, they have all been fighting the Hyksos. They have been trying to push them out, and they've been making some leeway, if you will, but the job is not quite finished. And some of them, some of his male counterparts and family members died early in battle, probably, or they died. And so it's left to him. What do you do when you're in that situation? So as we kind of talk about that and kind of gel, I want to look at the names that he chose for himself. How did he look at himself? God bless you. Thank you so much. Means devour, okay? Unas, okay? Am I okay? And unas means to devour. Okay, that's very good. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. So let's look at what names, how did Ahmose, how did he look at himself? How did he take on this massive thing? Think about it, that you have to take on your life. How do you see yourself going equipped? Because how you equip spiritually is going to determine how you're going to perform physically, how you're going to have the outcome of it. And what he looked at, his Heru name, and his Heru name was Het-ka-Ptah. And if you know anything about Kapara, and you know about the concept of evolution, the concept of there being many evolutions or cycles and rotations of a thing, a lot of times you'll see Kemetic people talk about the Kapara of Kaparas. And when God brought things into existence, there were many iterations of it. And it goes on for time immemorial. And he is calling himself right here. He's basically calling himself kind of divine of iterations, divine of manifestations, great of manifestations. Having that understanding that God has brought so many things into being, and that there's a cyclical nature to these things, that there is a cycle within which things work, whether that's the years, whether that's the months, whether that's, birth and rebirth, and, parents, the children, the grandparents, the great grandchildren, that type of thing, that you have a situation where there are a multitude of manifestations, and that God has many manifestations, and in that, inherent in that is power. And so he's saying, greater man, I am a literal manifestation, a great manifestation of God, and I can draw upon anything I need to draw upon. Now imagine this. Why is your soul great? Your soul is great because you can fashion your soul, fashion your mind to address any situation that may come to you. If you think to yourself as being just limited to your personality, you're wrong. That's just the things that have been feeding into you. When you stop for a second and understand that I can actually sit back, and if I need to go into a situation and be fiery, like I'm meeting a battle, or if I need to go into a situation and be wise and have a calmer head, or if I need to go into a situation and show love and compassion, or go into a situation to educate and to teach, whatever that, I can take on the characteristic that I needed, because my soul is essentially unconditioned. My soul is essentially a manifestation of being able to do an amazing amount of things in the manifestations of God. And he is basically saying, I'm a part of one of the great manifestations of God. Imagine that as being one of your powers when you go into any type of situation, having that perspective of yourself. And then he's also saying the Nebty name, as we mentioned, was the two ladies, like the two deities, if you will. And that his Nebty name was talking about perfect of birth, right? Someone whose birth and whose existence is perfect. Think about, there's nothing, God did everything with you right. Think about just not even putting into your mind anything anybody ever told you negative about you. Just get that out. That's just the stuff that's been feeding into your mind. That's not what God put in. That's part of what man put in it. That's part of sometimes the corruption that comes, right? When you come into this world and people are maybe jealous or they say various things. That's part of that. It's part of the whole, with the Shabaka stone, with King Shabaka, Neswt Shabaka from Kushite royalty, if you will, said, whatever you hear, whatever you breathe upon, whatever you think upon, whatever you let go into your heart, all these things feed into your heart. Whatever you're seeing, whatever you're hearing, whatever you're breathing on and meditating on goes into your heart that makes all your beliefs come forth. Imagine believing that you are perfect of birth. Instead of reject anything that anybody has told you. That's just the aspect of how your spirit works. Your spirit is impressionable. Your spirit can be molded to be whatever you need it to be. And if you feed in it junk, or if somebody's told you negative things, you start to believe that, and you take that into your ability as what you think is possible. But this man right here, this brother is saying right here, you know what? I'm perfect of birth, and I have within me a multitude of manifestations. I can face challenges. I'm not somebody who's limited. Imagine thinking of yourself as not being limited, but someone who's perfect as you're made. And then the golden Heru, he who binds the two lands, right? He's calling himself someone who's bringing together the two lands, even before it's done, right? Even before that's done, he is saying, I'm somebody who's going to take this challenge, this stuff that's in front of me that seems like it's separate. And we talk a lot about, and I'm looking to hear your opinions, and I love to hear your opinions. We talk a lot about the situations that we're facing today from a Kemetic standpoint, from a historic standpoint, from a society and a community standpoint, and being in a situation where things look like they're separate, like we're separate from each other. We can't bring things together. We can't bring male and female. We can't bring, whether it's Republican, Democrat, black, white, our communities together. We can't bring ourselves together. Even beyond that, within our communities, we can't bring it together. Having the mindset that the ability to unify, first you need to be unified within yourself. First, you need to understand it's possible. Then you need to have a game plan that's run by divinity that guides you, and you need to follow it, right? And when you begin to do that, you begin to touch on the part of people's souls that brings us together. So if you think there's a problem in your community, or, men and women can't get together, we can't get along, that can all be fixed, because you're going to be faced with a significant challenge in your life, right? Just like this man was faced with a significant challenge in life, and you're going to do nothing but divinity to overcome it. Nothing but divinity will get you through it. And so as I think about that, having that kind of perspective and seeing that things could be, separated, you can bring them together. It doesn't have to be something that's apart. You can be the stuff that comes from you, the divinity that comes from you can be the thing that brings things together, that binds it together, and doesn't just bring them together, keeps them together. right? I think about your life. I think about your family. Think about things specific in your life. You may think that, my career has nothing to do with my health, or I feel like things are falling apart in my life. You can be the one that binds these two things together. Let your career and your health and your education and your finance and your spirituality, let them all come together to serve you, to help you actualize, to give you abundance, right? And that idea comes with the prayer and the work that you do on the inside and the perspective you have with yourself. That's why I say it's so very important. It's so very important not to spend this time watching a lot of television, a lot of people come, your sports come on, or whatever the latest fad is that's coming on. A lot of people will spend a lot of time and attention doing exactly what Shabaka, what King Shabaka said, looking at things, listening to them, meditating and breathing on them, and then wonder why things are not quite right. Wonder why you don't believe in yourself. Wonder why you can't think that you can bind together the two lands or bring these parts of your life together. You absolutely can. You got to put attention to it. So do not, if football is coming up or whatever's coming up, do not spend your life or too much time watching these things. They don't build you up. And think about it. These people here, they didn't have a lot of distractions from a spiritual standpoint. They didn't have, TV or the internet or social media to spend times. They had more time, I think, probably, which is why they had societies that were more stable, right? They had more time and families that were able to stay together to focus on things that were spiritual. That's how you could come up with a ma'at or things of that nature. So this whole idea of being someone who can bind the two lands together and bind those things in your life that might be difficult, that may not seem like they're not together. You have the ability to do it. And then he also, what was his throne name? His whole, this Nebty Ra, Lord of Strength is Ra. Ra is the Lord of Strength. This whole idea, and this Lord, this is written to strength, and this is obviously Ra, which is that aspect of God, which is force light that brings things to life. Ra is the Lord of Strength. Lord of Strength is Ra. Imagine that's your name, right? Think about an aspect of God that literally brings life force, that brings life, like the sun, right? That brings life forth and representing like the sun, and saying that your name is Ra, is the Lord of Strength, that you are Lord of a massive, powerful force that has the ability to conquer many things and to bring life to many things. And this is something, you ever walk into a room and just brighten it up? You ever walk through a room, maybe there are children in a room, and they just brighten up and they come alive when you're there, and you plant seeds in their minds and in their hearts that last forever. And there are always people who have remembrance, and maybe you have remembrance of somebody when you were younger, a long time ago, who impacted you in a way, in a positive way, that grew in you. And you always remember that, and you always try to strive for that. What if you can be that person? See, Ra and the life force is more than just physical power. It's more than just like beating something up or force. It's that ability to walk into a room and light things up. It's that ability to be able to plant a seed in someone and to have it grow through the force of your love and your shining, and being able to have that impact on children, which is why you were able to do something that will last forever. Anything you're going to do, if you're building something that's going to last, it's going to last beyond you, right? It's going to last during your lifetime, whenever you build it, and beyond you. And this man was helping to build something, and his family and his father and his grandmother and grandfather and his brother, his whole family, they were helping to build something that would last for many, many years, to the point that thousands of years later, we're still talking about them. There are many, many people who lived thousands of years ago, many people from all over the world, and we don't talk about them. There are many cultures and societies that were magnificent, but they haven't rung in our ears and don't touch our hearts like this kingdom did, and like what this man was about to do in his life. So as I think about that, and we look at the last name, if you will, the Nomen name, the birth name, and then Ah, or the moon is born. Ah is born, and it makes you look at, because you think about Ahmose as his name. God bless you, and I'll check the chat. He's talking about the whole aspect of the deity being born. And I'll kind of look at this. What is it? Okay. So all right, great knowledge, information. Thanks so much. They had time for TV. They had no time for television, right? They had no time for television. Now talk a little bit about the Hyksos. We'll talk about them a little bit more in our next comment right here, New School of Thought. We'll talk a little bit more. So they had no time for some TV, as we're mentioning right there. They had no time for some of that stuff. So just checking the chat just real quick. So when you think about that, what you really put into your mind, it means Somaliland, since we have, okay. We are family, right? We're right. We are very much family. So when we think about that, God bless you. When we think about that, so here he is set up. Here is almost set up. He is a man who has embodied this. We can't go back in time and talk to him, but we can see and look at the names that he took on for himself. Greater manifestations of forms, great manifestations of forms, and being a perfect of birth and binding together the two lands, and Ra is the Lord of Strength, and being born, and that being a manifestation of an aspect of God. These are the names he took on. This this is how he looked at himself. Like I said, we can't go back and talk to him, but we can see what he chose to go by. What was his kind of mindset, if you will, and what did he go by? So as we kind of look into that, and just put them into a calendar. Let's put them in a timeline. And I'm going to, as you guys know, if you are members here, I'm giving you access to this. So you'll have this also to a timeline. So I'll be uploading a lot of resources to a member site for those who are members. Thank you very much. But I very much appreciate it. So let's look at, what's the timeline here? So we talk about the new kingdom. He's right around here. So this is just around 1550, 1525. That's when the general time that people talk about the new kingdom, like basically starting. But just to give you an idea, as we know from before, it's not just then. When you look at the new kingdom, you got to go back into Dynasty 17, his family, right? So it's not, we cut the line with him because he joined the two lands together, but that's not just the whole story. Remember, he had a family and he came from somebody, right? He came from somewhere, and there were a whole significant things, whether it's a resurgence of women or having the Medjay as a part of what they were doing. He was a part of that whole line of family that did that. And with that respect, so as we kind of get back and talk to him, just to give you a perspective of where he is in this whole timeline, he is right here. He is right here at what people call the start of Dynasty 18, right? And that's what people officially call the start of the new kingdom. And just to give you some perspective so you can see some of the names, this is just a remarkable list of names and people from a historic standpoint. These are all people related, familiarly. Imagine a family line that's going on like this, and who also saw themselves as God, as being representatives of God and being divine. So you have Ahmose, who we're going to talk about, his son Amenhotep I, Thutmose I, who was the father of Hatshepsut, Thutmose II, who was Hatshepsut's husband, Hatshepsut herself, who ended up taking on control and ruling of all of Kemet outright from her stepson, Thutmose III, who succeeded her and wanted to kind of get rid of her memory. You have Amenhotep I, Amenhotep II here, who did many things. Thutmose IV right here. You have Amenhotep III, who was a remarkable person when it comes to building things. And I'll just mention one of the most famous battles in history was fought by Thutmose III, the Battle of Megiddo. So he was the first person to really document in detail what happened on an actual battlefield. I mean, we talk a lot about ancient battles. This is one we should study, and I've talked about it before, and I'll talk about it again. But the Battle of Megiddo took place under Thutmose III. It was a remarkable battle, and a remarkable way it was documented. And so you all the way down to Thutmose the fourth, and then Amenhotep III, who was a remarkable builder. He was somebody who also should be remembered, and we are definitely going to talk about him. He is the person here who is kind of like, kind of starting this thing. He's a remarkable person, a remarkable person to remember, because some of the things he accomplished in life from a spiritual standpoint, I think, and just a longevity standpoint, is to be remembered. So we're going to definitely talk about him in this series as well. We're going to talk about Amenhotep III as well. So as we kind of move on, you're looking at the other people in this kind of line here. So you had Amenhotep III, and he was the father, who I just showed. He was the father of Akhenaten. So Amenhotep IV, that was Akhenaten's name, right? That was Akhenaten. Then he changed his name to Akhenaten. He was Amenhotep IV. He was after his dad. He changed his name to Akhenaten. People try to credit him with monotheism. We can get into that a little bit later. And he is the father of Tutankhamun. So, when you think about Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, and just this whole family line of Hatshepsut to Ahmose to Tut, this whole family line was a significant family. And this is getting started. This is getting started by this man and his family. This is a remarkable family, and they are going down in history. So just to give you that timeline in a remarkable way. So as I think about that, I stop and think, how do you build an empire like this? And this is just Dynasty 18. We're not, Dynasty 19 comes after this with Ramses, and there's a whole lot with that. But how do you build an empire that lasts? And that's kind of what we'll talk about as and one of the first part about it, as we've been talking about, is having the perspective of how you see yourself, having the perspective of divinity, having the perspective that you're about to do something big and that you deserve it, right? Don't let anybody tell you any differently. If they're telling you any differently, shut that off. Shut that off the TV. Shut the TV off. Don't believe that your situation is unmarketable, unhandleable, unimaginable. You are able to handle your situations. There are a lot of things that we can do that we have a significant ability to. So there you go. I'm just looking at that. So as we kind of move forward, so let's talk more about what they did and how you kind of move forward. And now that we got like the timeline of it, right? So as we talk about it, one of the major things that lets us know what Ahmose did. So obviously there were a lot of proclamations that he did himself, where he talked about who he was and what he did. But there were also some remarkable things that sometimes the people who will test you are the people who are around you. You got to treat everybody good, right? You never know who's going to be the person carrying the battle for you. You never know who's going to be the person going to battle, and you should treat everyone like they're important, like they're significant. And one of the people who runs out most significantly in history is a man by the name of Ahmose, and we call him Ahmose, son of Abana, right? And Abana is his mama, right? This is a man who identifies himself, and a lot of times they did that. They would say they would honor their fathers, and they would talk about being very significant with their fathers, but they would talk about how they were honoring both their mother and their father, and they would say themselves, I am so and so son of, and they would mention their mother. So this man's name was his mother's name was Abana, and his name was Ahmose. So you may see this in history, and don't get confused. We're not talking about the same person. The Ahmose who is the ruler, if you will, is a different person. So Ahmose who is here, and that's a different person than the person who's writing this story right here. So it's a different person. So when you think about it, Ahmose was a naval officer. So and then Ahmose was a common name, and it let you know that there were different deities in ancient Kemet that they respected. It wasn't just one deity; they respected many aspects, all kinds of aspects of God. They respected. So Ahmose, son of Abana, he lived in what we would call El-Kab today. He lived in the southern part of Kemet, south in the southern part. That southern part that was so important, that was so significant, right around what we would call like Nekhbet today and Nekhbet, and that whole area right across the Nile, that whole metropolitan area, if you will, urban area. It was a significant area that was there. And at the very start of ancient Kemet, that area was a part of the society that coalesced, that eventually went up to unite the two lands in the very first place, this area around Nekhbet. He was from this area. That's where he grew up. And he talks about this. And he has a rock cut tomb, a beautiful tomb. And you can see some of the scenes from his grandson's tomb. He has a beautiful tomb where he talks about his military expeditions, right? So I mention this because what you're seeing here are snapshots from his grandson's tomb. And you're seeing snapshots from his grandson, and his grandson likely presented there, where, he almost did so much in the Navy and in the military that he was able to pass on land and wealth to his grandchildren. And we talk about that whole idea of building an empire. It wasn't just almost the ruler, the Nswt, building an empire for everyone. It was also people who were helping to this whole effort, who were building, lasting empires and heritage for their family, as we talk about it. And I'll just check in really quick on the chat. God bless you. They were okay, there you go. Yes. God bless you. And thank you so much. I really much appreciate that. That's helpful. Even just the cheers on help, and the questions that cheers on help. So let's talk about this, and you'll be able to read it here. And then those who are members, I'll give you a copy so that you'll be able to read it and download it at your leisure. But he is talking about here, he says really specifically that he comes from the sea of Nekhbet, that he is son of Abana, and he calls his mother triumphant, if you will. And he says, I speak to you, all you people that are out there. You know what I have done. You know what I've accomplished in my life. That I've been awarded gold, and I've been honored several times in front of the whole land. So he's basically saying, he's attesting to what he did in his life, and that it was very public, the kind of honors that he got and how he fought. And he explains why and what he went through. And he says, you understand that this has been something that I've done, and that many times I've been awarded female prisoners of war and male prisoners of war. And I'll talk about that in a minute, because that whole concept of being a brave person, that whole concept of being awarded prisoners of war, I want to talk about that and kind of get into that, because that was something that took place all throughout Kemet's history. It took place all today. It takes place all throughout the world, unfortunately. And in antiquity, it took place. People had wars, and they took prisoners of wars, and they took those prisoners of wars back home throughout all of Kemet, throughout all of history. And so that idea that one society would not have interacted with another society, and they would not have blended, and they didn't have the same things in place that we have, the same kind of hate we had in place. Many of the people would have been able to eventually kind of move forward in life and have children and all that type of thing, and mixing would have taken place. So that took place as a result of a lot of things, open borders, wars, a lot of things that took place, and he documents some of that in his tomb. But he mentions, he mentions right here, he says, I've had a lot of bravery in my life. And he said, when you think about it, I've shown bravery in battle. And he says, a brave man's name lives on in what he's done. A brave person's name will live on in what they've done. It's going to live in your deeds. I have an aunt who used to say, don't do as I say, do as I say, not as I do. That's what she would say. Do as I say, not as I do. She would say that, and you couldn't talk back to her. You couldn't tell her no. She would say, you better do what I tell you to do, not just what you see me doing. But when you think about that, what you do, right? What you do is really the testament of who you are and your character. And here Ahmose is telling us from thousands of years ago, a brave man's deeds, a brave man's name lives on in what he has done. It lives on in the deeds that you do. And I think that's also true for a righteous person. A righteous person, your name, your reputation, whether or not you are respected by your posterity, by your children and your grandchildren, your children's children, is based on what you've done. You can talk a lot of stuff, but what did you actually do? How did you act? Did you actually act righteous? You can say it all you want, but did you not do as I say, not as I do? You can say it, all, but did you actually do it? And that's the kind of stuff that goes into people's hearts that lives longer. It's the actual deeds that you do. And I think whether you're claiming to be righteous, whether you're claiming to be brave, whether you're claiming to be historic, whatever it is you want to accomplish, I think God's goal is for it to live on and what you've done. And when I think about remarkable people, whether it's Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass or Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Marcus Garvey or Fannie Hamer or Ida B. Wells, so many people, I think about the actual acts, how they actually got down, if you will, with nitty gritty and put their lives on the line and actually did something, right? They didn't just talk the talk, they did it, they walked the walk. And this man is saying that if you want to be great, if you want to be brave, and one of the number one things, and you can tell me what you think about it down below, one of the number one things from a Kemetic standpoint that you could do to be remembered and honored and to be an honored ancestor is to have your children and your children's children and generations after you remember your name. To have them come and to give offerings at your ancestral temple, because many Africans, as you know, and many people around the world, they have maybe altars that they may have in their house. And in Kemetic times, you might build. I mean, that's what the pyramid was, right? The pyramids were, and the mortuary temples were temples where you would go and honor that person, basically to remember their name, to continue to feed them whatever energy, whatever respect you can give them for the life that they live, so they continue to be powerful on the other side and help you. Even today, whether you talk about the Edo people and people, the way people look at things, that's what they look at it. So they can continue to help you, and you can continue to feed them the power. That's how you remember it. So this whole idea of bringing a brave person is to be able to have people, your name live on, is to be able to have people. And that was the greatest honors, because a Kemetic person, you hear people write about a lot, almost from the time that they were born, even when they were little, or a young man or a young woman, they were preparing for their tomb. They were preparing you. You can read Kemetic literature will say, the land that you're living on now is really your grandchildren's. It's really your child's. Your eternal place is going to be in the afterworld. That's what you should start building for, and understanding that the life you live is really building another place for you in the afterworld. And so that's what Ahmose is saying here. He's saying that my bravery and a brave man's name lives on in what he's done, and the ability to have ancestral communication, having your people remember you, is what's significant in life. That's what he's saying here. That's what he's remembering. So he goes on and he says, I grew up in Nekhbet, and Nekhbet was, as I mentioned to you, was one of the significant historical places in ancient Kemetic history. That was one of the historical places. And he mentions that his father, was an officer, and he talked about how his father was an officer of Saint Kenred. So his father was an officer of one of Ahmose, the ruler that we're talking about, one of Ahmose's foreparents, like maybe his dad, that type of thing. So Ahmose, the naval officer, the soldier here, the naval officer, his father was also in the army and served under the king's father, if you will, the king's predecessor. And so he talks about his dad being there, and his father's name was Baba, and his father's mother's name. So his father's mother was Ronyanet. He talks about that. So he mentions that as well. So they're documenting grandmama. You will find in the New Kingdom, they mention women. It is not, you don't find them looking over whether it's Amenhotep III, whether it's Ahmose right here, and Queen Nefertari, whether it's Ahotep, whether it's Queen Teti Sheri. You find them mentioning the women, and we don't talk about that, but they did. They didn't smush over the women. They saw this as being a significant thing. So you find them mentioning it quite a bit, mentioning the women. And then he says, I served under as an officer, and I served under Nebty. So he mentions right here Nebty, which, as we just saw, was Ahmose I. So he's talking about Lord of Strength is Ra. That was the throne name of Ahmose I that we just talked about. He's talking about that he served under Ahmose. So he's calling his name. Right here, he's calling his name and telling us that he served under him, and that was, when by the time he got into the Navy, if you wanted, by the time he got into the military, this was the ruler of the land. That's what he's talking about. So I find that very interesting. When you start to read these things, they kind of come to you, and they become specific. So he's mentioning right here that he served under Nebty Ra, Ra is the Lord of Strength, and that I was still young, and I had not started a household, that I had not gotten married yet before I joined the Northern Fleet, and that he followed He followed Nebty to the northern area, to the northern part of ancient Kemet, and he mentions going to a particular city, which becomes very significant, which is why we start to know that he's talking about the Hyksos in a certain period of time. And he's talking about, and he goes to Het right here. And this is kind of the house of the region. That translates to the house of the region or the area of the region. This is kind of the area of avarice where the Hyksos were. And he talks about going to basically the battle where Ahmose, the ruler, the Nswt, is leading the army into the heart of what is the heartland of the Hyksos' power, right? And this area of avarice, and you guys can tell me more if I'm wrong, as you guys know some of this. God bless you so much. Thank you so much. Initiation. Thank you so much. God bless you. He is this gentleman right here. He is talking about going into the heart of where the Hyksos were. And if you know about this area, avarice, this whole region, the Kemetic people had entire regions that were set up, and then within the region you would have a town, or kind of like a septet, like a general kind of province area, and then within that province area there would be towns. So you kind of had big, huge regions, and then imagine provinces, and imagine town. The area where the Hyksos were, this whole area around avarice, was an area where the deity Set was honored, right? Set wasn't always looked at as bad from some people. It was a deity where it was, that's the Set that was the part of the Ausarian tale, the Ausar Set tale, where Set kills Ausar and he fights Heru, Ausar and Set's son, for the battle, who would be actually the ruler of the land. That's the famous tale. From a New Kingdom perspective, here you have Ahmose, the Nswt, the ruler, going to battle, right, with the people in his navy and the people in his military, and he's going in an area where the people have accepted Set. And I think that becomes a remarkable thing, because even when you fast forward hundreds of years, you get to Ramses II. When he builds his city, if you will, he builds in the north in this area. And so when some people think about, because there's a lot of talk about whether or not the Hyksos are ancestors of or somehow related to the Israelites and the Jewish people who would develop, there's a lot of connection there, and there's a lot of talk around that. And we won't get into all that today, but I kind of want to mention, we may touch on some of that a little bit today as we're talking about that. So here is Ahmose, the military officer. He's going into this area of avarice, which was an area where Set was the deity, right? And he talks about how, he showed bravery in front of the king, that he fought in front of the king, and that he was able to, that he even, went down into the water. He talks about here that he even went down into the water to fight and to bring a captor across and carry them across the water. And he would, gather people. And there was a thing that they did back in this time when they had battles that they would do, is that you're fighting hand-to-hand combat. This is thousands of years ago. You're fighting 3,000-4,000 years ago, more than 3,000 years ago. You're fighting hand-to-hand combat. A lot of times what they would do, if they killed somebody on the battlefield, they would chop off their hand. And they would cut off the person's hands, and they would bring it to either their commanding officers, or if they had a chance to let the person closest to the ruler know that, hey, I killed two people, or I fought and I was able to kill an enemy, chopping off their hands. So you'll see them in this talk about, I brought away two hands, or I was able to fight off and I showed bravery and I was able to get a hand, and that type of thing. So when they mention that they brought hands, what they're saying is that I chopped off somebody's hand who I killed, and I brought it as proof to my commanding officers that I killed these people. So Ahmose, who is the naval officer, he is talking about when they're at avarice, and that, several battles took place, and he was there at each of the battles, that he's fighting, and he showed bravery, that he followed on foot behind the Nswt, almost the king, the ruler, if you will, and that he was, chopping off hands and killing people and went down to the water and fight and brought a captive across the water, captured people and brought them as prisoners of wars, and that he showed great bravery, right? A brave man's name, a brave person's name lives on in what they've done. And so when he did that, he got rewarded and he got gold. And he talked about that he did several times, and he was brought, and he got plenty of gold, and he brought back another hand, and I received gold in the second place. And so he begins to talk about how he is getting gold, and he is getting rewarded in front of people, and given prisoners of war that he captured, either the ones that he captured or ones that the ruler would give him, or the ruler's right-hand person would give him, and that he's doing this all in front of it. And these are the battles where they're fighting the Hyksos. And not only does that happen, is he getting gold, this is how he is able to, because he talks about land that he gets, prisoners of war that become his servants that he takes back with him, as well as gold that he gets, and he ends up passing that on to his children and his grandchildren, who you see, this is his grandchild's tomb right here, his grandson's tomb. He ends up passing on his rewards, if you will, from war, which is what they did with a lot of soldiers. If you were fighting an army, you had soldiers, you rewarded your soldiers. He passed this on, these riches, if you will, to his family. And so there's another battle that took place, and he talks about being brave there and being able and going down the ward again and fighting, and also that he was told the Tut's messenger, the royal messenger, and again he was given gold. And so there were several battles that took place with respect to Ahmose, the ruler of Kemet, and Ahmose, this naval officer, fighting the Hyksos. There were several battles. It wasn't just like a one and done. Apparently, there were several battles. And he talks about right here, which is kind of interesting, this whole Hut. He talks about this whole region and how basically there was a bit of a siege. And he talks about in that particular, when they finally were able to bring down the city of Avaris, that it took a while, right? But he was able to help to go in to break there, because apparently Avaris, there was it was a walled city, if you will, and they were pretty well protected. And the Hyksos, I guess, thought they were going to be able to win. But remember, Ahmose's older brother, Kamos, and his family, his grandfather, father, they were fighting this whole time. So they were making inroads to the north. Finally, the city fell. And when the city fell, Ahmose, the ruler, and Ahmose, the naval officer, the two separate people, the whole military were able to come in and take this area. But apparently this was not enough, because it becomes very interesting. A lot of people will talk about, various things with respect to just, whether or not, ancient Kush, when ancient Kush was taken over by the new kingdom, which we're going to talk about, which is related to this battle, by the way, which is why I'm talking about it. They just mention it, but they don't give you context. If you remember what I was talking about the other day, Ahmose's older brother, Kamos, talked about receiving a message, intercepting a message with the Hyksos, who were based out of Avaris, where they were trying to send a letter to the Kushite people, to the Kushite ruler, trying to get them to do an alliance against Kamos, against his family, against what will become Dynasty 18. And so when you think about Ahmose and when he fights the Hyksos, after he fights the Hyksos, he goes and fights the Kushites. And part of that might have been because he believed the Kushites were possibly going to attack him or join with the Hyksos. So there's more to it, and there's more we can dig into it, but we don't get the background as to why they were imperialistic, right? Why did they stretch so far? Because one of the things that happens after Avaris falls, after they get the Hyksos and they kick them out of the city of Het-ka-Ptah, and they kick them out of Avaris, Ahmose chases them all the way to Sharuin. So he chases them all the way to this area right here, which is kind of an amazing thing, which is why also I think about that whole time we think about whether or not the Hyksos were related to Israelite people. This area, he chases them all the way to what is today Gaza, Palestine, and or Israel. So we're not 100% sure exactly where this is, but they know that it's in the area of what is modern day Gaza, Palestine, or Israel, like right in that area. That's where this particular city was. The Hyksos ran. They left because their avarice fell. They had been, they were being successfully weakened in battle after battle. And when their main stronghold fell in an area that was under the control, if you will, the deityship of Set, they end up leaving the northern Kemet, and they end up going east back across the desert, and presumably to an area where they thought was kind of like home, presumably to an area where they thought would be safe for them to go, right? Because why else would you go? God bless you. Thank you so much for joining. So yeah, free Gaza. So many places, presumably to an area where you would, why else would you go there if it wasn't a place that you thought you could go, right? And so they go to this area, and this area is sieged. Ahmose sets up a siege. Ahmose begins to surround the city of Sharuin. He begins to set up for what we think maybe 3 years. So this wasn't like a one and done thing. This wasn't like they kicked out the Hyksos one battle. No, they kicked him out of Avaris, and they chased him all the way to Gaza, to Palestine, to modern day Israel, to that area, and they sieged the city for years. They cut off food, they cut off water, they sieged them until finally that area fell too. And then Ahmose, the king of Kemet, the ruler of Kemet, he comes in, and he triumphantly comes in over and he takes over this whole area that is where Gaza and Palestine and is today, and everything kind of in between. He is now the ruler. You begin to see the beginning of the imperialistic nature of ancient Kemet. And the reason why is that they were kicking out foreign rulers who went there. They kicked them out. So he begins to set up a situation where they're controlling this area for hundreds of years. It's not just like a one and done. You begin to see the birth of the empire of ancient Kemet. And the reason is they were kicking out the Hyksos, right? So as he chases them all the way to what is modern day Gaza and Palestine, he is, as I said, he says a siege. He's seizing them. He's surrounding for years until finally the area falls and he becomes king. And now he's outright ruler. He's an outright ruler. And the interesting part about it is that Ahmose the gentleman who was as a part of this battle, Ahmose here, who wrote this on the walls of his tomb, Ahmose tells the story, and he tells the story of being there for years, and he tells the story of them of the whole city falling, and him taking prisoners of war again, and taking hands and taking prisoners of war, and then winning the battle. And now Ahmose the Nswt, the ruler, he's king. He's done it. He's kicked these foreign rulers out, completely out of Kemet, and he's in control of that area too. So he puts them as basically, vassals him. He has them pay tribute and pay taxes, and now I'm in control because y'all not coming back. You ain't coming back, and you're going to be paying taxes, and I'm going to set up my own kind of like administration. We're not going to have this again, right? So he does that, and once he finishes with that area that is in Gaza and Palestine, he goes down to Kush. He goes into Nubia. He turns his effort after fighting many battles with Hyksos, and after a period of time, he turns his effort south. And I believe it could possibly be because his older brother intercepted that message where the Hyksos were trying to reach out to the Kushite people and to get them in an alliance. And when you read about, we talked about earlier, Kamos's famous discussion when he talks about, I am the Ahmose's older brother. He talks about I'm the ruler of only parts of Kemet, right? I have a foreign leader in my north, and I have the Kushite people in my south, and they are taking up part of my land. It's believed that the Kushite people basically pushed all the way up to the southern border of ancient Kemet, right there around the first cataract. It's believed that they controlled all of that. So they were powerhouse. And so Ahmose, thinking that probably they had been in some type of alliance with the Hyksos, having chased the Hyksos all the way out into what is modern day Israel, if you will, and modern day Gaza, he comes and he goes into Kush. And this is one of the first times you see Kemetic people go this far down into Kush. A lot of times people would just make it seem like they were controlling all of Kush the whole time. That was not the case. You find them controlling at periods of time lower Kemet, parts of lower Nubia, if you will. But it isn't until they start going farther and farther down where you start to see this truly permanent and this truly kind of really aggressive stance. Even though there were some things happening in the Middle Kingdom, which you're talking about, this is where the empire is born. And so as we talk about that and kind of put that and just kind of give us some perspective as we kind of look at that and see where Ahmose fits in, he is also having a successive battle with Cush, and he successfully wins that battle according to Ahmose's tomb. He successfully wins that battle. But what happens is very interesting, because we'll talk about this next time. Cush is not a one and done thing. Kush doesn't take 2 or 3 years to conquer. It takes like 50 to 75 years, 70 years or thereabouts, decades, because Kush is a powerhouse, and they fight. And not only does Ahmose have to come, but he has to come, but his son has to come. Amenhotep the first has to come. Thutmose the first has to come. They have to come for over 50 years to try to finally to set up a permanent place around the third cataract of Anal, which was the heart of where Kush was. But with that being said, you're kind of just sticking with the new kingdom. God bless you. Kind of sticking with the new kingdom. Thank you so much. I appreciate you for joining. This whole idea and concept of how you build something that's significant. How do you take something that your family did, something that you want to do significant in your life? How do you avenge your family? How do you rid something that you don't want to have you? Part of that is having a divine, first of all, it starts with having a divine aspect of it. How do you take something that you have a challenge in your life? Or maybe you're carrying the banner, if you will, of your family, or you're trying to rid something out of your life, or you're trying to do something that lasts for a long period of time. First of all, you got to be right. You got to be on the righteous side. I truly believe that our ancestors, and particularly the ones who were doing the civil rights movement, who were fighting for people to have a better way of life and being able to vote and just walk down the street and not be lynched and crazy things like that, that they were on the side of righteousness. The reason why it was so powerful, it wasn't just because of them or something special, the way they look. They were powerful because they were right. Rosa Parks was powerful because she was righteous. She was on the right side of it. There's a righteousness and a power that goes with that. And so when you begin to want to make a big move, and Martin Luther King was right because he was right. What he was saying was true. He was speaking mind. He was talking about doing unto others as you would have them. He was talking about that. That's why it was powerful. Malcolm X was right. You know what I'm saying? That's why it was powerful, right? That's why these people in our family hammer, people who were speaking up for justice and saying, treat us fairly, that the righteousness was on the side of it. And because you have that, Martin Luther King and people like Rosa Parks, because you had that, there's a power that goes with that. So as you begin to talk about and begin to think about ways to change something in your own life, ways to build something that lasts, you must be on the side of righteousness. Put righteousness on your side. Make sure that you're righteous first when you do that. Make sure you have a perspective of yourself as divine, where you're letting divinity lead you, right? And look at the example of your ancestors. Look at the role of I'm sure there are many days when Martin Luther King knew he was going to die. He knew they were going to kill him. He said that. He basically said it. I like to live a long life, but, longevity had its place. But I'm not worried about that right now. He said, I've been to the mountaintop. He says that. But at the end of the day, he never stopped. Think about the example that our ancestors gave us. Those who came before us to try to make our lives better. What did they do? Having that righteousness on your side, understanding that you can, knowing that you're able to, understanding that you're able to live on, to do something for your family that goes beyond you, having that concept of being an honored ancestor and earning that right? I think that becomes a significant way that you move any mountain in your life. That first you have to deal with righteousness. First you have to have divinity on your side, and you kind of move it from there. And I think going back to the names that they had is a significant way of doing it. And I'm going to just check the chat real quick. Mott and Mott's values, right? We gods and goddesses. Deities. Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you for being a member and supporter. You'll be able to see that. Thank you so much, guys. We gods and goddesses. Rosa Parks Martin, Malik Al-Shabaj. When you think about that, you talk about leaders, and I see commonality. I see similar things in what they did in their leadership. I see commonality in that because at the end of the day, all of them had to face fear. Both whether you're Malcolm or Martin, Malcolm X, Martin King, you had to face fear. Whether you're Rosa Parks, whether you were Fannie Lou Hamer, whether you were Sojourner Truth, whether you were Harriet Tubman, whether you were Ida B. Wells, you had to face fear. But you also had to have a great sense of duty and a great sense of righteousness and divinity on your part. And they all called on a higher power. You're going to face things that seem difficult. And I'm sure when Ahmose was fighting this war, and you see just an example of him here, and this was also a woman who was a queen of either the 17th dynasty or the 18th dynasty. So she would have been related to him and his family some way. You see him in a situation where his whole family is trying to accomplish something, and he's moving forward. Sometimes I'm sure he faced fear. I'm sure he had a challenge where he looked at it and said, how am I going to be able to accomplish this? How am I going to be able to make this happen and to really do something with it? And as you begin to face that fear, you have to begin to nurture within yourself an idea of your divinity, nurture within yourself the ability, right? I think it's not only just, thinking about yourself as being, a son of Ra. Think about yourself being a body that's perfect, not allow people to put limitations on you or to make you think you're less than what you are. I think you are a perfect birth. You are perfect the way God made you. You are perfect. You have the ability to accomplish whatever it is you need to do. God made you perfectly to fulfill your purpose. You think about me, my nose is this way, my hand is. God made you the way you are so that you can fulfill whatever purpose, whatever great purpose you have, and to know that and to be aware of that and to be successful with that and to live in that and to have an idea. Lord is of strength is Ra. That the very command, the very control of what is strength. That's what you actually can control strength. That whole idea of you being a manifestation of that being a significant part of what you do and how you look at yourself, and understand that you belong, right? Just like the golden rule, you belong, you deserve what you had. So it's not just also that you think of yourself. You have to nurture this belief and nurture this energy, and you also have to prepare yourself. So it's education. I believe in 5 things, right? If you teach a child, there are 5 general areas you must teach a child to really have them excel in life, and you can't push away any of these areas. One is spirituality, right? That's the number one thing. If they don't have an understanding of who you are, if you don't know who you are and whose you are, none of the other things matter. You will drop the ball on so many things. If you don't have a strong spiritual foundation of knowing who you are and whose you are, it allows you to accomplish anything and so much, as well as being moral, right? So that spirituality comes first, and your relationship with God comes first. Then you have education, right? You must train yourself to do something, because if you put the spirituality first, you're doing exactly what we talk about from an art standpoint. You're putting your divinity and your prayer and your discipline, if you will, you're putting that in service of the divine, right? So you begin to have your education. You must educate yourself and prepare for whatever it is you have to do, whether that's science or physical, whatever it is, all kinds of things. You must educate yourself and prepare yourself for the skills you need to do what you need to do. The other is health. If you're not taking care of your health, then what does it matter? If you're not eating right, if you're not exercising, if you're doing things on purpose, some things will happen to you can't control. And that may be part of your destiny or things that just happen to you that you have to deal with. But then there are a lot of things that we can control. There are a lot of things that we're Lord of, and we're Lord of what we put in our mouths. Think about it. That could be one of our names, Lord of what you put in your mouth, right? Lord of what you put in your mind. You're Lord of what you listen to. You don't have to listen to that crap. You don't have to watch that crap. You don't have to put that stuff in your mouth if you can do. So the health part, because if you're not healthy, it's hard for you to even function right. If your body's not functioning on the right energies in the right health, in a healthy way. So your spirituality, your education, your health, The other category becomes your finances, right? And finances from a resources standpoint. So if you don't understand how to manage the resources and the time and the place where you are, it's going to be difficult for you to help your family. When we think about business and pulling together society, and whether that's based on agriculture and growing your own things and building your own things, whatever it is, it's about resources. And you have to be smart about resources, how to share them, how to make sure everybody gets them, how to make sure you have enough for yourself, right? Because you should have enough for yourself. You should have enough. I'm not saying you should have, so much that you take from other people. You should have enough to be happy and to live. And so should everybody. You should have enough to take care of yourself. So managing your resources becomes significant. And then finally, your family, your relationships, your love and the family, those people you choose to develop families with and the family you have, that's a significant part of who we are. These are the people you're walking through life with. These are the people you are cooked with for some kind of way. And some people have to get away from their family. I get it. But some people, a lot of us, this is what we're hooked with. These are the people, for whatever reason, God has chosen us. And my son say all the time that we may have a shared destiny. There may be something that we do together, but these are the people that are helping to raise my family, helping to raise my children. Those are the people that I'm locked in step with. Your family becomes significant. The ones you choose to bring into your family to partner with, and the ones you're born with. So when you think about that, with this family, health, education, finances, and resources, as well as spirituality, those are things you got to prepare yourself for. So if you're thinking about, I got a lot of work to do. It's not only do I drum up the energy and have a perspective of myself as being divine and divinity there, I have to make sure that comes first, and that's my foundation. And then I educate myself. Then I make sure I'm strong enough to do it. And I make sure I know how to gather the resources to get it done. And I make sure I bless my family and the people who are along with me as I do that. So I just wanted to share this. God bless you. I thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to hear what you say down in the charts, in the comments down there in the chat. So much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you'll join me again soon. Thank you so much. God bless you.